Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here because honestly, we're about to unpack something truly fascinating today. We aren't just looking at a traditional monster story, we are diving into a severe, almost clinical case study of total ego dissolution. We're tracking the incredibly tragic trajectory of Matt Hagen, the man who ultimately becomes Clayface. Now, most analysis out there tend to focus on his social fall from grace, right? The loss of his glamorous acting career, his public standing crashing down. But as a clinical observer specifically studying identity loss, I want us to look inward. We're going to explore how one specific chemical and the absolutely wild shape-shifting powers it gave him didn't just mutate his body. It completely fractured his sense of self and created this massive, inescapable psychological void.
Think about this haunting reality for a second. Hagen suffers a complete loss of the authentic self, leaving behind a creature that is everything and nothing all at once. That sets a terrifying, almost body horror tone for everything we're about to discuss, doesn't it? Because the true horror of Matt Hagen isn't just his shifting, muddy physical form. The real terror, it lies in the profound psychological erasure taking place beneath the surface. He becomes an absolute master at taking on literally any form, but the cost is the complete and utter obliteration of the person he actually was.
Okay, let's dive right into the catalyst for all this. The primary visual and symbolic driver of his psychological descent is a chemical product called Renew You. Just the name itself is this highly deceptive promise. It's a play on the phrase renew you. It promises the user a total rebirth, a fresh start, a return to flawless perfection. But well, from a psychological standpoint, we know that any rebirth based purely on masking the outside is inherently fraudulent. It's a false promise. It preys on these deep-seated human insecurities about identity and self-worth.
In the source material, this substance is presented as this really thick, viscous cream. Think about what that represents, metaphorically. It is the literal physical manifestation of a facade. You can actually see this brilliantly in the creative animation choices early on. The animator specifically rendered the cream to look unnaturally thick and viscous, which heavily foreshadows his eventual fluid, unstable state. Initially, Matt Hagen used this substance simply as a cosmetic tool. He was an actor. He relied on his face for his livelihood and, frankly, for his ego. So when he suffered physical imperfections, Renew was just a quick fix to smooth over those human flaws. He was essentially painting over the cracks in his armor, using the cream to maintain a perfect artificial exterior while hiding the vulnerable, deeply flawed human underneath.
Now, this tragic trajectory unfolds in three very distinct steps. First, it acts as a cosmetic tool, which we just talked about, but then we hit a massive, violent turning point. Hagen is forcibly overdosed by Roland Daggett's men. And that brings us to step 2, transformative poison. The liquid violently shifts from being this superficial beauty aid to a toxic catalyst. And the final result? Step 3, a complete blank slate. In excess, this chemical literally strips away all defining features of his face and his body. The very thing he used to maintain his specific, curated image ends up wiping that image away entirely.
So the absolutely crucial takeaway here is that the overdose represents the exact moment the mask becomes the man. Psychologically speaking, this is devastating. Hagen's desperate, obsessive pursuit of artificial perfection results in his ultimate ego death. The chemical's original purpose was just to refine his features, but the overdose erases them completely. He is left as a literal and figurative blank slate. It's this terrifying visual erasure that proves a very dark psychological reality for us. If you obsessively pursue a fake, flawless exterior, you're eventually going to lose your authentic self entirely.
Now we have to face his new reality, and the contrast is just stark. We go from Matt Hagen, the celebrated actor, to Clayface, the psychological parasite. Before the chemical overdose, Hagen's acting was a craft. It was an art form. It was a profession where he voluntarily stepped into a role and, crucially, stepped back out. But after the transformation, his shape-shifting is no longer an art. It morphs into a desperate survival mechanism and ultimately a weapon. He isn't acting anymore, guys. He is surviving by hijacking the identities of other people.
Let's look a little closer at this parasitic psychological state. Hagen develops what we can clinically diagnose as hollow mimicry, and he uses it as a desperate coping mechanism. When he assumes another person's shape, whether he's perfectly replicating the nervous twitch of a bank guard or copying the exact vocal cadence of a wealthy executive, he doesn't just copy them. He actively tries to become them to escape his own internal emptiness. He steals their voices with his hollow accuracy. Why? Because he's operating as a psychological vampire. Having completely lost his own identity, he attempts to fill that massive aching internal void with the stolen lives of others. It's an incredibly tragic, maladaptive way to cope with having literally no self of his own.
There is a profound, incredibly sad dependency going on here. Hagen can only feel whole or real when he is wearing the identity of someone else. Without a stolen identity, he is just an amorphous blob. His forced shape-shifting leaves him with an unbearable internal void. Just think about the psychological toll of that for a second. To feel even a fleeting sense of humanity, to feel grounded in reality at all, he has to become someone he isn't. His entire existence relies completely on borrowing the reality of the people around him.
And this brilliantly illustrates the agonizing tragedy of his condition. It really doesn't matter who he mimics. He could perfectly replicate the suave, put-together billionaire Bruce Wayne, or he could transform into a common street thug. The outside looks flawless, sure, but beneath the surface, the horrifying reality remains. He is merely a mass of sentient mud. And the animators brilliantly captured the psychological instability through their creative choices. They drew his default form as constantly shifting, bubbling, and fluid, visually proving that without a stolen identity, he literally cannot hold himself together. Every single time he transforms, it's not some cool triumph of his superpowers. It is a painful, inescapable reminder of the flesh and blood man he can never, ever be again. The perfect copy only highlights the permanently ruined original. When we synthesize the effects of the Renew You poison with his constant behavior of hollow mimicry, we arrive at this core clinical concept, the total dissolution of ego boundaries. The chemical didn't just physically mutate a cellular structure, right? It completely dissolved the psychological borders that separated Matt Hagen from the rest of the world. Without a permanent face, without a permanent physical body, the boundaries of his ego just collapsed. He honestly doesn't know where Matt Hagen ends and the characters he steals begin.
By the time his tragic path inevitably leads him to face off against Batman, the man is essentially gone. He's just a collection of performances held together by a dying will. He's trapped in this agonizing, endless cycle of identity theft. It's literally a state of psychological purgatory. And the contrast between Batman and Clayface here is absolutely staggering. Think about it. Batman uses a mask by choice. He adopts an identity to forge a symbol. Hagen, however, has masks forced upon him just for survival, and it completely erases his identity in the process. He is basically a fractured mirror, constantly reflecting other people's identities because his original glass was shattered a long time ago.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly provocative question to reflect on. If your ability to look like absolutely anyone is the very thing that ensures you will never look like yourself again, who are you? Matt Hagen's powers are the ultimate cruel irony. In his desperate quest to perfectly control his image, he lost the ability to ever have an image of his own. It's a haunting reminder of the fragility of our authentic selves, and how the masks we use to hide our flaws might just be the exact things that eventually consume us. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those deep questions, and I'll see you next time.